Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many decisions do you make every day that aren't really decisions? They feel like choices, but they're not. They're reactions. You buy what's fastest. You keep the job you hate. You avoid risks that could help you. Not because you want to, because you can't afford to be wrong. That's not a character flaw. That's a financial position. And here's the truth nobody likes to say out loud. Most Americans don't live paycheck to paycheck because they're irresponsible. They live paycheck to paycheck because they have no margin, no buffer, no room for error. And when there's no room for error, your brain switches modes. You stop thinking long-term. You stop planning. You start surviving. Now here's the strange part. There is a very specific moment when that survival mode shuts off. Not completely, but enough to change everything. And it's not when you become rich. It's not when you get a raise. It's not when you hit 6 figures. It's when you save your first $10,000. Not because $10,000 is impressive, but because it's protective, and protection changes behavior. Before $10,000, money feels like a wild animal. Unpredictable. Dangerous. Always one bad move away from attacking you. After $10,000, money becomes something else. A tool, still serious, still important, but no longer terrifying. That shift is subtle, but permanent. Think about how your body reacts when something goes wrong. A flat tire, a medical bill, a surprise expense. Before savings, your heart rate spikes. Your brain panics. You start negotiating with reality. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I can delay it. Maybe I'll figure it out later. That's fear talking. After savings, the problem doesn't disappear, but your reaction does. You don't panic, you handle it, and that difference changes who you are. Here's something people don't realize. Stress is expensive. Not metaphorically, literally. When you're stressed about money, you make worse decisions. You overpay for convenience. You accept bad deals. You finance things you shouldn't, because urgency makes you sloppy. Savings removes urgency, and when urgency disappears, clarity shows up. That's the real value of $10,000. Not spending power. Decision power. Now let's address the skepticism. You might be thinking, $10,000 isn't that much anymore. You're right. It doesn't buy status. It doesn't impress anyone. It won't change how your life looks on social media, but it will change how your life feels, and feelings drive behavior more than logic ever will. Most people don't fail financially because they lack information. They fail because they're constantly stressed, and stressed people don't play the long game. They play defense. Here's the brutal math. When you have no savings, every dollar matters too much. So you avoid opportunities. You stay in situations longer than you should. You don't negotiate. You don't invest in yourself. Because you're scared of losing stability you don't actually have. That's the trap. You feel stable until you're not. $10,000 breaks that trap. It doesn't make you invincible. It makes you resilient. And resilience is the foundation of every good financial decision. Let's talk about identity. Because money problems are rarely about math. They're about self-image. Before savings, you see yourself as someone who's bad with money. Someone who's always catching up. Someone who hopes nothing goes wrong. That story shapes everything. After savings, the story changes. You're someone who prepares. Someone who plans. Someone who doesn't panic. That identity shift is powerful. Because once you believe you're capable, you act like it. Now here's something interesting. The first $1,000 you save feels painful. The first $5,000 feels slow. But something happens on the way to $10,000. Momentum kicks in. Your habits solidify. Saving stops feeling like sacrifice. It starts feeling normal. And normal is sustainable. That's why the first $10,000 is the hardest money you will ever save. Not because of the amount, because of who you have to become. After that, money behaves differently. Not magically, predictably. Now let's clear up a myth. People think saving means giving up joy. It doesn't. It means giving up leaks. Subscriptions you forgot about. Convenience you overpay for. Impulse spending that doesn't actually improve your life. Most people don't lack money. They lack direction. Savings gives money a job, and money with a job behaves better. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Someone earning $60,000 with $10,000 saved is more secure than someone earning $120,000 with nothing saved. Income looks impressive. Savings keeps you alive. Protection beats appearance. Every time. And once you experience that protection, your priorities change. You stop chasing upgrades. You start chasing stability. And stability compounds. Now let's talk about what $10,000 actually covers. Most car repairs, most insurance deductibles, several months of basic living expenses. That means most problems stop being emergencies. They become inconveniences, and inconveniences don't control your life. Emergencies do. This is why financial calm feels so strange when you first experience it. You're waiting for something to go wrong, and when it doesn't, your brain relaxes. That relaxation is addictive, in a good way. It's the feeling of not being hunted by your own finances. And once you feel it, you want more. Not more stuff. More margin, more control, more time. And that's where this is going, because money isn't really about money. It's about time. And in the next part, we're going to talk about how $10,000 changes your relationship with time, work, and risk, and why that shift quietly puts you ahead of millions of people who make more money than you do. Once you have $10,000 saved, something unexpected happens. You don't feel rich. You feel steady. And for most people, that feeling is completely new. Before savings, your financial life feels like standing on a moving treadmill. You're walking, sometimes even running, but never really going anywhere. One unexpected bill and the speed increases. One mistake and you trip. That constant motion isn't progress. It's survival. But $10,000 does something subtle. It lets you step off the treadmill, not forever. Just enough to look around. And once you can see clearly, your decisions change. Before savings, you make decisions based on urgency. What's cheapest right now? What solves the problem fastest? What avoids discomfort today? Urgency narrows your thinking. It forces short-term solutions. And short-term solutions almost always cost more in the long run. After savings, urgency loses its grip. You're no longer choosing between bad options. You're choosing between good ones. That's a completely different game. Let's talk about work, because this is where the shift becomes obvious. Before savings, your job isn't just a job. It's your lifeline. That makes every interaction heavier than it should be. You tolerate bad management. You accept extra work without pay. You avoid hard conversations. Not because you lack courage, because you lack a safety net. But when you have $10,000 saved, the power dynamic changes. You're still responsible. Still professional, but not desperate. And desperation is what gives other people leverage over you. Without desperation, you negotiate differently. You ask for raises with facts, not fear. You set boundaries without apologizing. You stop confusing loyalty with self-sacrifice. That alone can change your income trajectory. Not overnight, but permanently. Now let's talk about risk. Because people misunderstand risk more than almost anything else. They think being cautious means avoiding risk. It doesn't. It means choosing the right risk. When you have no savings, everything is risky. Even doing nothing Staying in a bad job is risky. Ignoring health issues is risky. Delaying education is risky. But you do it anyway because change feels scarier than stagnation. Savings flips that equation. With $10,000, doing nothing becomes the risky choice, because now you have something to protect and grow. You start thinking in probabilities instead of fears. You evaluate upside and downside. You stop gambling, you start investing, and that's a huge psychological shift. Here's a simple example. Before savings, investing feels reckless, like putting rent money on the table and hoping for the best. After savings, investing feels intentional, because your basic survival is already covered. You're not betting your life, you're allocating surplus. That distinction is everything. This is why most long-term investors tell the same boring story. Emergency fund first, then invest. Not because it's conservative, because it keeps you rational. A calm investor beats a panicked one every time. Now let's talk about stress. Real stress, not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind that never turns off. The kind that makes you tired even when you sleep. Financial stress lives in the background. It drains your attention. It shortens your patience. It makes small problems feel enormous. Savings lowers that baseline stress. Not completely, but enough to notice. People with emergency funds report better sleep, better focus, and fewer emotional swings. Not because their lives are perfect, because their nervous systems aren't constantly on high alert. That's not motivation talk. That's biology. When your brain isn't scanning for threats, it performs better. You think clearer, you plan further ahead, you make fewer impulsive decisions. That alone can improve every area of your life. Now let's talk about decision fatigue. Every day, you make hundreds of small financial decisions. Can I afford this? Should I wait? What if something goes wrong? Each decision uses mental energy. When that energy runs out, you default to habits, usually bad ones. Savings removes many of those micro-decisions. You don't stop caring about money. You stop obsessing over it, and that frees up mental space. Space you can use to learn, to create, to think strategically. This is why people with savings often seem more focused. They're not smarter. They're less overloaded. Now let's address lifestyle inflation, because this is where many people sabotage themselves. They assume that earning more will fix everything. It doesn't. Earning more without saving more just raises the stakes. Bigger bills, bigger commitments, bigger stress. Savings forces you to define enough. And defining enough is powerful. Once you know what enough feels like, you stop chasing upgrades that don't actually improve your life. You stop spending to prove you're okay. You start spending to make life easier. That shift saves enormous amounts of money over time. Now let's talk about leverage, because leverage is how progress actually happens. Leverage isn't working harder. It's putting effort where it multiplies. Education, skills, relationships, health. Before savings, these things feel optional. After savings, they feel like obvious investments. Because you can afford to wait for returns, you're not forced to see immediate results. And patience is the secret ingredient most people never develop. Now, here's an uncomfortable truth. The economy rewards people who can wait. It punishes people who can't. High-interest debt exists because urgency exists. Late fees exist because panic exists. Impulse spending exists because stress exists. Savings removes urgency. Without urgency, the system loses power over you. You stop overpaying for speed. You stop financing your lifestyle. You stop renting peace of mind. That alone can save tens of thousands over a lifetime. Now let's talk about identity again. Because identity is what makes changes permanent. Before savings, you might see yourself as someone who just isn't good with money. That belief quietly shapes your behavior. You avoid looking at numbers. You procrastinate. You hope things work out. After savings, you have proof. Proof that you can plan. Proof that you can follow through. Proof that you can handle uncertainty. That proof changes how you see yourself. And once your self-image changes, your behavior follows. You stop sabotaging yourself. You stop making excuses. You start acting in alignment with who you believe you are. That's the real compounding effect. Not interest. Identity. Now let's be clear about something. $10,000 doesn't solve all problems. It doesn't protect you from everything. It doesn't eliminate effort, but it removes desperation. And desperation is the most expensive state a human can be in. Without desperation, you stop making fear-based decisions. You stop trading your future for short-term relief. You stop reacting, you start designing. That's the shift. And once you experience it, you don't want to go back. In the next part, we're going even deeper. We're going to talk about time, why money is really stored time, how savings buys you flexibility instead of stuff, and why this milestone quietly changes how you experience your own life. Let's talk about the part nobody budgets for. Time. Because money is never just money. Money is stored time. Every dollar you earn represents hours of your life you already spent. Every dollar you save represents hours of your future you just protected. And this is where $10,000 stops being a number and becomes a boundary. On one side of that boundary, time controls you. On the other side, you start controlling time. Before savings, time feels hostile. You wake up already behind. Every hour has a job. Every delay feels dangerous. You're not thinking about next year. You're thinking about next week. And living like that changes you. It makes you impatient, reactive, emotionally exhausted. That's why people without savings often say yes too fast and quit too emotionally. They're not dramatic. They're under pressure. But once you have $10,000 saved, time changes texture. You don't rush as much. You don't panic as easily. You don't feel like every decision has to be perfect immediately. You can pause. And that pause is where intelligence shows up. Here's a simple but powerful example. Your boss asks you to take on extra work. Before savings, your body answers before your brain does. You nod. You agree. You tell yourself you'll figure it out. Because saying no feels risky. After savings, you actually think. You ask questions, you negotiate, you decide. Because the consequence of saying no isn't catastrophic anymore, and that changes everything. Power doesn't come from aggression. It comes from options. Savings gives you options. Now let's talk about health. Because money and health are deeply connected. Financial stress raises cortisol. High cortisol wrecks sleep. Bad sleep wrecks judgment. Bad judgment wrecks finances. It's a loop. Savings interrupts that loop, not dramatically, quietly. People with emergency funds sleep better. They recover faster. They're less reactive. That's not a luxury. That's baseline human functioning. And baseline functioning is underrated in America. We celebrate hustle. We ignore burnout. But burnout is expensive. It leads to mistakes, missed opportunities, bad decisions. Savings doesn't make you lazy. It makes you sustainable. Now let's talk about patience. Patience isn't a personality trait. It's a financial condition. When you have no buffer, patience feels impossible. Waiting costs too much. So you rush. You overpay. You settle. Savings makes waiting affordable, and waiting is where leverage lives. Being able to wait means you don't buy at the worst time. You don't sell in panic. You don't accept the first offer just to end discomfort. That applies to investing, careers, and relationships. Now let's talk about investing again, but from a different angle. Most people think investing is about picking the right asset. It's not. It's about behavior. The best investment strategy in the world fails if you panic. Savings protects your behavior. Because when markets drop and your emergency fund is solid, you don't freak out. You don't sell at the bottom. You don't abandon the plan. You stay rational, and rational beats smart over the long run. This is why people with modest incomes but strong savings often outperform higher earners. Not because they're better at math, because they're better at staying calm. Now let's address something uncomfortable. A lot of people use spending as emotional regulation. Bad day? Buy something. Stressful week? Treat yourself. There's nothing wrong with enjoyment. But when spending becomes therapy, it gets expensive fast. Savings gives you emotional distance. You don't need purchases to calm down, because your life already feels more stable. That reduces impulse spending dramatically. Not through discipline, through relief. Now let's talk about social pressure. Because this is where many people bleed money quietly. You don't want to feel left out. You don't want to seem behind. So you spend to keep up. Trips, dinners, upgrades. Not because you truly want them, because you don't want to feel different. Savings changes that. When you know you're financially solid, you stop seeking validation through spending. You don't need to prove anything. You're okay with opting out. That saves money. But more importantly, it saves energy. Now let's talk about freedom. Real freedom, not the Instagram version. Freedom isn't quitting your job tomorrow. Freedom is knowing you could survive if something changed. Freedom is flexibility. Freedom is not panicking when plans shift. Freedom is margin. And $10,000 is the first taste of real margin most people ever experience. Not enough to retire, enough to breathe. Now here's a key insight. Most people think financial success is about accumulation. It's not. It's about reduction. Reducing stress. Reducing bad options. Reducing forced decisions. Savings reduces the number of decisions you're forced to make under pressure. That's why life feels simpler. Not because you have more, because you're less constrained. Now let's talk about how this changes your future self. When you save $10,000, you send a signal to yourself. I can take care of problems. That belief compounds. You start trusting yourself. You start taking responsibility instead of avoiding it. You stop hoping things work out. You make them work out. That's the psychological shift that separates people who stay stuck from people who progress. Now let's be clear. This isn't about being perfect. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still spend money on dumb things. That's fine. The difference is, those mistakes won't threaten your stability. They'll just be mistakes. And mistakes are cheap when you can afford them. Now here's the part nobody tells you. Once you cross this line, you don't want to go back. Not because you're greedy, because you've felt what calm feels like. And calm is addictive, in a healthy way. It's the absence of constant fear, the absence of background anxiety, the absence of feeling one step away from disaster. And once you've experienced that, you protect it. That's why people who build emergency funds tend to keep them. Not because they're disciplined, because they're aware. And awareness changes behavior. Now we're ready for the final piece. Because everything we've talked about leads to one conclusion. This isn't about money. It's about control. Control over time, control over decisions, control over your future. And in the final part, we're going to tie this together. We'll talk about the system, the illusion of normal, and how to use what you now understand to step out of constant financial pressure without needing to be rich. And yes, we'll end with something that sticks. At some point, a strange question appears in your head. Not, how do I make more money? But this, why does everyone look busy? and still seem stressed. That's when you start noticing the pattern. Most people aren't failing because they're lazy. They're failing because they're stuck in motion, constant motion, spending to maintain normal, working to maintain spending, stressing to maintain work. It's a loop, and the system loves the loop because urgency is profitable. When you're rushed, you don't negotiate. When you're stressed, you overpay. When you're tired, you choose convenience over value. That's not an accident. That's the environment. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The system doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards positioning. It rewards people who can wait. And waiting requires savings. Without savings, you're forced to play the short game. Paycheck to paycheck, bill to bill, crisis to crisis. With savings, you step out of urgency. And urgency is where most bad decisions are made. This is why financial calm feels rebellious. You stop reacting. You pause. You think. And pausing breaks the pattern. Now let's talk about normal. Because normal is expensive. Normal is financed cars. Normal is subscriptions you forgot about. Normal is lifestyle upgrades that quietly lock you into higher costs. Normal looks stable, but it's fragile. One missed paycheck, one medical bill, one broken transmission. And suddenly, everything shakes. Savings breaks the illusion of normal. Because once you have a buffer, you realize how thin the line really was. And instead of scaring you, that realization empowers you. You stop chasing appearances. You start prioritizing resilience. And resilience is the most underrated form of wealth. Here's the paradox. People think financial freedom looks exciting. It doesn't. It looks boring. Emergency funds, long-term thinking, saying no to things that don't matter. From the outside, it doesn't impress. From the inside, it feels incredible. It feels like not panicking when something goes wrong. It feels like not checking your bank balance 5 times a day. It feels like knowing you'll be okay. That's the payoff nobody markets. Because you can't sell calm, you have to build it. Now let's talk about the biggest illusion. People think money problems disappear when income goes up. They don't. They change shape. Higher income without savings just raises the stakes. Bigger bills, bigger commitments, bigger pressure. That's why so many high earners feel trapped. They didn't build margin, they built complexity. Savings simplifies life. It reduces forced decisions. It reduces stress-based spending. It reduces dependence. And reduction is power. Now let's zoom out. What does $10,000 really represent? It's not a finish line. It's a threshold. The point where fear stops running the show. The point where time starts working with you instead of against you. The point where money becomes a tool instead of a threat. That's why this milestone matters. Not because of what it buys, because of what it removes. Panic, urgency, desperation, those are expensive. Now here's something important. This isn't about being perfect. You will still make mistakes. You will still waste money occasionally. That's fine. The difference is, those mistakes won't define you. They won't knock you off balance. They'll just be data. And learning is cheap when you're stable. This is why people who cross this line rarely go back. Not because they're disciplined, because they're aware. They've felt the difference between reacting and choosing. And once you've felt that, going back feels unbearable. Now let's bring this home. This channel isn't about hype. It's not about flexing. It's not about pretending money is easy. It's about understanding how the game actually works. So you can stop blaming yourself and start positioning yourself. If this video changed how you think about money even slightly, if it put words to something you've felt but never articulated, if it made you feel a little calmer, a little clearer, then do 3 simple things. First, subscribe. Not because we promise shortcuts, but because this channel exists to talk about money honestly, intelligently, and without pretending you're an idiot. Second, like the video, not for vanity, but because it helps this message reach people who need it but don't know how to ask for it. And third, send this video to one person, one real person, someone you actually care about, the kind of person you'd stay up late talking to about life, money, and the future. Not to convince them, just to start the conversation. And finally, leave a thoughtful comment. Tell us what hit, what shifted, what you're going to do differently, because this wasn't made casually. It was built carefully, for people who think deeply, but still appreciate a little sarcasm along the way. Money doesn't have to control you, but you do have to understand it, and now you're not guessing anymore.